Hello and welcome to this live stream this Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm just going to adjust the camera there slightly. Perfect. Okay, hello. So today is English. Last week, hopefully you joined me for my maths live stream, which was multiples, factors, prime factors, and then lowest common multiple and highest common factor. If you didn't join me on that, and you still want to have a look at that, then please look at the video on my YouTube. Even better, if you'd like to join my Patreon, the link will be in the description below if you're not already a member and watching this live now, of course, and you can watch the full recording on there. So like I do every week, this video will be partly just for the YouTube audience and then partly for Patreon exclusive. So what the Patreon viewers will get is me going through a text, and we're going to be annotating and evaluating and then looking at how we might actually respond in an exam situation. The YouTube video will just be the reading and the annotation, and I won't actually go through necessarily the writing part. So for that extra bit of guidance, you might want to head over to the Patreon if you're watching this on YouTube, because the whole video, the pre-recorded live, will be now uploaded onto the Patreon so that you can look at that at any time. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at evaluative writing for English language GCSE. So the questions are worded slightly differently depending on your exam board for an evaluative piece of writing, but essentially evaluative writing is you're showing your ability to read a text and evaluate how well a writer has achieved something. So how well they're presenting ideas or emotions or feelings or moods or atmospheres or anything like that. So in one of the more popular exam boards, this is often presented as a statement that you have to agree or disagree with. So you're given a statement about a writer and the effectiveness of their writing, and you have to respond in terms of how far you agree with that particular statement. Now, the exams that have these statements for you to write an evaluative piece based on those, they're normally written so that you should agree with the statement. So they're never going to give you a statement or an idea that is difficult to find evidence for or isn't really true. But obviously you do have a choice and flexibility in terms of how much you agree with it. So for example, if an exam question were to ask you, or if it gave you a statement that said, this writer creates a sense of joy in the text, how far do you agree? Presumably, that text is going to be a joyous text, and it's going to be easy for you to agree with that. But there might be moments where you decide, actually, I don't think it is all joy. I think there are some darker moments in there, and it's absolutely okay for you to go, I partly agree because of this. However, there are some elements which aren't joyous, and this is instead what the writer is creating. So what you don't want to do is go in with a negative viewpoint in terms of disagreeing. So rather than just saying, I don't believe the writer to have successfully presented a sense of joy, you are instead saying the writer has successfully presented a sense of something else. So always go in with the positive framework, and that way you'll be able to form an argument and find analysis in something. If you're saying that the writing isn't actually that good, you're not going to be able to say much about it beyond that it's not that good. So in being positive in the things you are noticing, it's going to make your analysis much more easy to do. Okay, so today what we're going to do is have a look at the very opening of War of the Worlds by H.G Wells. So what I have done for those on Patreon is I have uploaded the full first chapter of that book. So this book was written very long time ago. I believe it was 1843. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. But it was one of the first books which dealt with real sci-fi themes. So it's about the invasion of aliens, essentially, from Mars. It's obviously not the first book. I believe Jules Verne kind of started the whole sci-fi genre. Again, correct me if I'm wrong on that. There might be some other quieter writers that I'm not aware of. But H.G. Wells was definitely part of that crowd as well. So it's just interesting seeing the birth of that. It was a very old text, but it's very good and well written. So we're going to have a look at that. The reason I've put the full chapter up, we're not going to look at the full chapter today, is because I think as we go through these English sessions, it's quite nice to have a little bit of continuity with the text we're reading. it's quite nice to read a book alongside it. So as a bit of homework between now and in a fortnight when we have the next English session, just read that chapter, and then we'll look perhaps at part of chapter 2 next time, or the end of chapter 1. Then we've got a little bit of continuity. Obviously, it's also good to look at a variety of texts, and that's kind of the point of English language as well, is to vary it. But it's not the longest book in the world, so we will move on past War of the Worlds afterwards. It's just nice for a little bit, I think, to have you reading something alongside, because we can talk about the themes of the book, etc., as we go, which is always good to do, because it also helps you practice literature, because I'm assuming most of you will also be doing an English literature GCSE, and so being able to talk about a text in its full context, and how the narratives weave together and how it's structured is also a really beneficial thing to do. So I'm going to stop waffling now, and we're going to read just the opening page, I think, and then we're going to approach a question, an evaluative idea. We'll do a little bit of annotating. That will be for the YouTube audience. We'll discuss how we might evaluate in this YouTube video, and then the YouTube video will end just before I get into writing a little bit of a response. We might do a full response, we might do part of a response for this Patreon, but we're definitely going to look at the structure and how we articulate ourselves in evaluative writing. So let's have a little look at this first chapter here. So if you are on Patreon, please download this. It might be easy even if you print it, if you would rather, if you can do that quickly on the live, or if you're watching a recording of this, you can obviously pause this, print that now. I think having it in front of you and physically highlighting is often a little bit better. I think people kind of respond more to physical notes, and that will be what you're doing in your exam as well. But if you don't want to look at it on screen, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to be annotating it on screen as we go. I'll be using this stylus pen, which doesn't often give my handwriting full justice, so please forgive me for the bad handwriting on here when I annotate. Hopefully you'll be able to read it, and I'll fully explain what we're talking about anyway. Okay, so first things first, let's address the question that we're going to be answering, because I think personally, when I'm in an exam, this is what I tell students to do, is to read the questions before we read the text. If you have the questions already read, then they're somehow sitting in the back of your mind somewhere, and when you're reading the text, you're already going to be answering your own question, the exam question. You're going to be answering the question as you read in your head. It's going to be working in the background there. Also, you know what you're looking out for. Okay, so the question that we are going to be looking at today is, now I may switch this slightly from the question I put in the description, but I'm going to make it very similar. So apologies if you've prepped for this exact question. I'm going to put it on this text somewhere so that you can see it. There we go. Right, so I'm going to put it up here. So evaluate. Not a big B there. Evaluate how well or how successfully H.G. Wells has created a sense of wonder at the universe in the opening of the text of War of the Worlds. Now, as I said before, this could have been phrased like this. So some of the examples say, like, a student says, or somebody says, H.G. Wells has done an amazing job. So they've given an opinion in the statement at creating a sense of wonder at the universe. How far do you agree? So obviously, some of your phrasing in your response is going to be different depending on the style of question that you're actually given. So if you're given a question that asks you how far you agree, you're always going to be talking about your argument and how far it aligns with, or maybe not aligns with, the statement you've been given. If it's a straight up question like this, or a task you're given to evaluate, then you don't necessarily need to be using words like agree or disagree, but you definitely need to be making your opinion clear and using evaluative language. So the kind of top tip I would give, and I'll come back to this in a minute after we've read and annotated and we get into the writing, for the Patreon viewers, but just as a general tip for everybody, when you're doing evaluative writing, some of the easiest ways of getting into that is to use adjectives which are positive and describe how well the writer is doing what they're doing. So words like skillfully, skillfully, words like, it's not liking that. Skillfully's got one L, isn't it? I bet. There we go. Everybody gets stuff wrong. Competently. Oh, goodness me. Impressively. Successfully. So using adjectives like that to describe what the writer is doing signposts your response as evaluative writing. So that's kind of my top tip there. Okay, we're now going to read the text. So I'm going to get my highlighter ready for in a minute. I'm just going to read it first, but we're going to be thinking in the back of our minds as we read it about this sense of wonder that is potentially being created and how well it's being created and how it is being created. Okay, right, so chapter 1, The Eve of the War. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria under the microscope do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us, and early in the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. Okay, so we're going to stop there. So we're basically reading the first page, which slips into the second page there, but it will look different depending on your copy, obviously. You might have a hard copy of this book. So let's think about the question then. So the question being, how successfully has H.G Wells created a sense of wonder at the universe? Now, I think there are definitely elements in here where he absolutely has done that. So if we look at that very first sentence, no one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. This idea that no one would have believed definitely brings us a sense of the how incredible it is that this is happening. But what I think we kind of go on to, particularly at the beginning of this extract, is less wonder and more. He's making a point about how insignificant man must seem to these creatures. So it is wonder at how powerful the intelligence of the universe might be. There's also another tone in there, I think, a tone of helplessness and almost diminishing man, human beings, trying to make people feel small, perhaps, that as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. So that simile there is creating a sense for us of our own insignificance, and perhaps making us feel helpless and unimportant, which is less wonder. Wonder feels like a really positive emotion, and more fear. So there's a fine line, isn't there, between fear and wonder. When you're looking at how powerful something might be, it can impress you and make you feel in awe of that thing, but it can also frighten you because it makes you realize how powerless you are. So when we go on with infinite complacency, there we go again. So it's highlighting to the reader that perhaps they shouldn't be complacent about their place in the universe. Infinite complacency, perhaps making them realize their own hubris in believing themselves to be the most powerful. What we've got to remember, this is published halfway through the 19th century, and the story is talking about how people were at the end of the 19th century. So it's highlighting that, this is coming. This might come. So don't be naive in thinking that we're the most powerful. Be aware that there might be something more. Went to and fro this globe about their little affairs, again, diminishing human beings and perhaps making us feel insignificant and vulnerable. Serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible the infusoria, so that's kind of the small organisms that we might be studying under the microscope, do the same. So maybe even they think themselves significant. So it's trying to emphasize how insignificant we are again. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Now, I think this is where the wonder comes in. I do actually believe up until that point, it's less wonder and it's more about inciting fear. Through emphasizing the power of other beings and the powerlessness of human beings. So we kind of slip into wonder here, right near the end. So yeah, across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds, as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes. This here, the envious eyes thing, it's not quite alliteration, because the alliteration, remember, is the repetition of sounds at the beginning of words rather than letters. It's visual alliteration, but it's not quite the same thing. Because the envious is and the eyes are I, so it's not the same sound. But the phrase itself creates an acknowledgement of how lucky we are perhaps to have this earth and to live upon it. And that creatures who are infinitely more intelligent than ourselves and powerful actually look at our earth with envy. So what we have is quite amazing. So actually here we do start to go into wonder a little bit. And also this phrase here, the gulf of space. That for us is to make us recognize the enormity of space and how vast it is and infinite. And there are things about it that we will never understand. And we will learn more and more, perhaps, as humanity goes on, but there will never be a point where we know everything. And slowly and surely drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. So actually, now as I said at the beginning, it's really important to agree with the statement, because in agreeing with the statement, they've given you that statement for a reason. It's evidently there. But actually here, it's nuanced. So what I'm going to do is partly agree with the statement. I'm partly agreeing that H.G Wells has created a sense of wonder at the universe because he's emphasizing how amazing and infinite and powerful it is and how beyond human understanding it is. But what he's also doing beyond wonder is creating fear. And he's doing that really well. He's successfully creating fear for the reader, for human beings in general. So I'm never saying that he's not doing something well. So this is my point about evaluative writing. You don't want to say the writer's really rubbish at this and I can't find any evidence that he's creating wonder, because in doing that, you are limiting your response and you're not actually doing any analysis, so you can't get any marks. And fortunately, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. So whether you like the text or not, you have to speak positively about it. Even if you change what you're talking positively about, you might simply disagree with someone's statement that it is wonder, that they've misinterpreted it. Actually, what H.G Wells is doing really well is creating fear. But I am going to partly agree with it. But I'm going to answer this question rather than the agree or disagree question, so I might phrase it slightly differently. So my first sentence, and again, I'm going to go into more detail when I actually write a little bit of the response with the Patreon crowd. Again, if you are just watching on YouTube, my Patreon link is in the description below, so please click and join there. You'll be able to watch this recording in full, so you won't have to stop when we stop in a moment. My very first sentence, again, is going to be using the words of the sentence. So I might say this: whilst I partly agree. Now, I can use the word agree, even if it's not specified with a statement, because I'm still agreeing with that idea, right? So whilst I partly agree that H.G. Wells is creating a sense of wonder at the universe by presenting it as something that is vast, infinite, and beyond human understanding, the feeling that comes through more prominently is fear. Okay, so I'm saying, yes, he's showing wonder. Actually, what I think is more important is this, and I'm going to talk about that now as a sentence. So, more prominently is fear. Wells incites fear in his readers by highlighting again and again the powerlessness of human beings compared to more intelligent creatures in the wider universe. Creating a feeling of vulnerability and a different word than powerlessness or vulnerability, inferiority. Okay, now I have actually started writing a little bit, so very lucky, the YouTube crowd, that I'm doing that already. This is my introduction. Now, in an introduction to an evaluative piece of writing, you don't need to do any quoting, you don't need to do any analysis, any subject terminology, you just need to state your opinion. And what needs to be important is that the opinion that you state here is then reflected in the work that you do afterwards in your main paragraph. So I've just responded to the question in showing how far I agree with it, and generally speaking, why. Not giving specifics, I'm just generally explaining my reasoning. And then I will go into various evaluative and analytical paragraphs that are going to back that up in a minute. Okay. In order to do that, of course, I need to do a little bit of annotation. So let's have a look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight two things that are showing fear, and then I'm going to do a bit of annotation at the moments down here, which I believe is showing wonder. And in terms of structuring my response, it would probably make more sense if I talk about the wonder first, because I've mentioned the wonder first in my introduction. Your introduction needs to be like a pared down version of your entire essay or your entire response. It's like a little mini version. So I'm probably going to start by talking about, yes, the wonder he creates, but then go into this idea of fear and talk about that. So actually, let's do a little bit of annotation down here first. Now, we've done a bit of annotation before on other videos, but just as a recap, when we annotate, what we want to find initially is some kind of technique that's going on, some kind of method. So what writing method is the writer using to create their effect, and then the effect of that. So we always want to talk about ideas and effects of writing in terms of subject, terminology, and method. So we need to be aware that the writer is using something to create their ideas. So in gulf of space, gulf being a big expanse, I'm gonna call that a metaphor, calling space itself a gulf. And what that does is it creates a sense of size, and a gulf is like a space that sometimes you can't cross. So it feels inaccessible to us. So it creates a sense of size and right, inaccessibility. Kind of come back to what I mean by that later on, but when I actually write it up. But I'm just kind of writing that down so because it makes sense to me right this minute. We can't bridge it. We can't go there. We can't access it because it's too huge. It's too beyond our understanding. Envious eyes. I'm just going to talk about that. Well, actually, what that is there is personification, of course. I was just going to talk about the adjective, but the personification itself is showing that what they're looking at is something to be envious of, but also what it does is it perhaps makes these other creatures more alien to us because we don't know much about them, and then just talking about their eyes, their viewpoint, we feel removed from them. We feel like we can't fully understand them yet. So regard this earth with envious eyes. Personification, what it does is it shows, so highlights how amazing the earth is. And as I said just now, it kind of alienates us further from these aliens. I won't mention that here though, because here I'm talking about wonder. So it's mostly about how amazing the earth is. And we'll go into the fear of these creatures in a minute. Okay. Right. Now I'm going to think about this creation of fear and inferiority. I'm going to find 2 quotes to do that. I think I'll have a paragraph where, because the parts of here that I've found wonder in are very small. They're small phrases. I'm not going to be able to do a lot of zooming in here because the envious and the gulf I'm already kind of talking about. So I'll put those in one paragraph. And then I'm going to find a quote each for my other 2 paragraphs, which are going to be talking about the fear. And I'm probably going to be doing some single word analysis in those to pad out each of those paragraphs a little bit. It's always better to say a lot about a little than a little about a lot. So don't be quoting loads and saying a little bit about everything. Quote once in a paragraph and just pull that quote apart as much as you can. That's where you're going to get the high marks. People make this mistake in literature as well. I see people trying to remember loads and loads of quotes and they just try and quote as much as they can. You get no marks for remembering quotes, I don't think. Remembering exactly how the mark scheme works for the literature. You don't get any marks for just remembering quotes. Of course you don't. You're getting marks for your analysis. So if you remember a couple of quotes and you analyze them amazingly and you link it to context, you're going to do really well. If you remember 20 quotes and just kind of list them all and say one thing about each, you're barely going to get anything. So don't become overwhelmed by how many quotes you have to remember for literature. This is a bit of a side note. And then just spout quotes in the exam because it's not going to get you any marks. You're getting marks for the work you're doing with your quotes. So back to this, I'm just going to pick 2 other quotes. Okay. So I'm going to use this simile here. Scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. When I actually quote that, I might cut some words out because it's quite a long quote. Just do ellipses, ... to try and cut some of those things out. It's quite a lot going on in there, though. Scrutinized and studied. We've got some sibilance there, which is the repetition of S sounds. S sounds, because of our associations culturally with snakes and the devil, danger, creates a sinister tone there. We feel threatened by these creatures who are scrutinizing and studying us. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. So this simile is making us realize our own insignificance. Because we often think of those sort of single cell organisms as quite insignificant. We don't believe them to have the consciousness that we do. And perhaps more complex creatures might look at us in the same way. Our own insignificance. I might, if I was doing single word analysis, probably go in on that word transient. So remember, we never want to just say the word transient. We want to specify its word class. So the adjective transient is to suggest that human life is unimportant and transient, and it's just not significant in the grand scheme of things. Okay. Life impossible. I think I'm going to go back down here actually for another thing. He's talking about, again, the creatures who are more intelligent than us, saying intellect's vast and cool and unsympathetic. So the use of the adjectives I'm going to say that it's a semantic field. Ooh, it's nice about semantic field. I was thinking of a different word there as I was writing it. Semantic field. Semantic field being a group of words close together which relate to the same topic and make us think of similar associations. So it's a semantic field of, I'm going to say evil, particularly the cool and unsympathetic, danger. I'm going to zoom in on this word vast. So again, adjective vast. And the reason I'm doing that is because actually adjective vast is creating wonder and fear, because it's amazing, vast. But that's also threatening because it's being paired with these other adjectives here, wonder and fear. Great. So what I would do in terms of structuring my response is my first paragraph is going to be about wonder, and I'm going to talk about the gulf of space. I'm going to say the right to use as a metaphor in the gulf of space to create a link it to the question. And then I'm going to say also the right to use personification in envious eyes. That'll be my first paragraph. I'm not going to be too specific about how I'm going to do that because I'm going to go through it on Patreon in a moment. And then I'm going to do a paragraph each based on this quote and this quote down here. And then to finish off my evaluative piece, I'm going to come back to write a conclusion, which is going to be very similar to my introduction, and then it sums up all of the things that I've been talking about in the response. It's quite likely that after you've written the introduction and you actually get to writing, you'll be writing things that you weren't expecting to write, and so those things might pop up in the conclusion, which means the conclusion is often more there's often more in it than the introduction because you've got more to sum up. But you basically want to sum up your ideas, make your opinion clear, and finish it off in a very similar way as how you wrote your introduction. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody on YouTube, for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. If you please like to join us on Patreon, the link is in the description below. Patreon will mean that you can watch this live every Sunday at 2 p.m. and you can watch the full video, and the full video will also then be uploaded onto Patreon. I have all of my previous weekly lessons on there as well for you to enjoy and get some good revision and use from. if you join. So please do that. Thank you very much.